Day 2.
All right, on the left here, I have the old pulley. And as I showed you, it already cracked and broke, and it's just a mangled mess because of bearing on the water pump going out. And I'm assuming the rattling, caused it to hit the body of the pump and shred, which explains a lot of the dirt and dust that I'm seeing down here by the pump that I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. There we go. It must have been grinding and shearing off bits and pieces because it's plastic. The new pulley is aluminum, much more hardy, and should go in shortly. Okay, so one of the things that you have to do before you can get this water pump out is you need to remove this pulley, which is the crankshaft pulley. It's also called a harmonic balancer. Basically, in most engines, the engine is essentially trying to shake itself apart because it's not exactly the most balanced design in the first place to be in a V shape for the engine. So what this does is any issues with the way it shakes, since it happens at a harmonic frequency, what this thing does is it counterbalances those differences. Now, of course, there are counterweights at the bottom of every piston on the crankshaft to counter that imbalance and that shaking, but this is an added extra thing that helps. And the reason why I've put a piece of tape at the top is to ensure that I make sure I put it back in the right position, because that would be a terrible idea to put this back in the wrong position. It can essentially help the engine shake itself apart. So I'm going to make sure that I put that at least a piece of tape to mark it. I was looking for chalk, but I forgot I have kids, so I can't find the chalk. But yeah, this is my next headache. I need to get this thing out, so let's get to it. Pulling the crankshaft pulley was actually a lot easier than I thought, at least loosening the bolts. Of course, I soaked them in WD-40 the night before, so maybe that's why it's a lot easier to pull it. But that's good. That means this won't be as hard as I thought. The next thing now is I need to get that belt off of the crankshaft pulley, or harmonic balancer, whichever one you want to call it. Let's get back to it. This thing is not exactly light, not heavy, but it's not light. But also, to help you, you'll notice there's a little notch right there that you have to slip it on. But it's also good that I marked it with some tape just so I know where it is and where it was supposed to be when I reorient this back on to the car. But it's out, and on to the next step. And just so you can see what I'm talking about, there's the part that it mounts onto on the crankshaft, and it has that little notch right there. That's going to help make it easier for me to put this back together when I'm done. Now, arguably, this is one of the easier pumps to work with, outside of the fact that that I had to get the harmonic balancer out before I could put this in. But one of the tricks I found that helps is to orient the new pump in the same position as the old pump outside, so you can visually see where all the bolts are. As you can see, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts. They're all 10mm bolts. And then of course I have to take off the old thermostat. Well, it's actually a new thermostat. I replaced it about 4 months ago. So take the new thermostat off and put the new thermostat on the new pump, take it off the old pump, and we should be pretty much nearing the end of this. So let's get to that. So you see the difference? You see the difference in the design? They went with a plastic impeller inside of the pump, and it just ate away at itself. You can see the bearing is all mangled in here, and of course, you know, the seal of course is damaged. That makes sense. But the thing that's crazy is the bearing is basically destroyed. So again, I don't understand companies going with plastic parts on things that go inside of an engine or even mount to the hot side of an engine. I don't get that. This is why older cars were better. It's not about the fuel efficiency or anything like that, because let's be honest, older cars drank gas like mother. But they were more reliable because all the components by the hot thing were designed to handle the hot thing. They weren't like pieces of plastic that could break off. I mean, I'm sure this was some kind of cost savings, and arguably the new pump is, honestly, with new designs, the new pump is a little bit lighter. I would have said it was heavier, but honestly, it's a little bit lighter. But the metal impeller would have made more sense than a plastic one. So here we are. This also explains some rattling noises I was hearing from my car, and I couldn't figure out what was causing it, but here we are. So now what I need to do is to pull these 3 bolts off of the thermostat and then put them on there, and then that takes care of this transfer. I originally put some Loctite on when I put this into the car, and I find it funny that the Loctite's what's causing the problems getting it off. The original thought was that I wouldn't have to replace this again. Well, the thermostat's not the problem in this case, so. I'm also noticing another sensor that I'm gonna have to put on the new pump. Sometimes you want to stop in the middle and just make sure you check the orientation of things so you know you're putting it on the right way. The last thing you want to do is do this and then you get it wrong. You know, all frustration aside, this really wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse to do this. I think honestly, the hardest part of this at this point is looking like getting that balancer back in place, and there's a solution for that, so it might not be too bad. All right, so that was from the old washer. I'm examining the new washer, or I should say the rubber seal. Like I said, it only went on a few months ago, and it's in actually really good condition, so I should be fine. Yeah, I should be fine, so I'm not gonna worry about if it's gonna leak going on to the next one. It should be fine. I had originally put it on with a little bit of the other gasket still being there because it was hard to get off the last bits of it. But with the new one, it should be fitting better. And also there's a fair amount of a lip on it, so it shouldn't leak once I mount it and get it on nice and tight. So before I forget which way it was oriented, I might as well put it on right now. What I'm noticing with these things is you don't necessarily have to tighten it like crazy. You just want to get it nice and snug. The crazy tightening will be down there when we go ahead and put everything back in. All right, so here's the pipe. So I want to make sure that there is no residue from the previous gasket on here. Because it looks like there is. Actually, before I do that, I need to make sure that the new one is actually in the box. All right, so I'm glad I actually checked before I got started really scraping at it, because in the box, they only gave me the main gasket and this one, and I was about to scrape this rubber seal off of this pipe, and that would have been very bad. So if I look at the original, none of it actually came off in here. So it just sits in there. So the bigger concern is making sure there's no rubber gasket on this pipe, and there isn't. It actually came off inside of the actual unit. So I need to go ahead and mount that inside of the unit and put the other gasket on the unit. And then just make sure the surface on the inside is in decent condition. I'm seeing some silicone gunk. I'm thinking what happened was because of the bearing blowing out, that might have been what caused the problem. Then this white stuff right here is residue from the silicone that was inside of the bearing. I'm hoping it was silicone. That would have been logical to use, right? We'll see what happens. All right, so it's nice and clean. I'm just inspecting to make sure there's no gunk or problems. There's a little bit of residue. Let me see if I can get that off right here. Yep, it's just coming right off as I'm rubbing it. Yeah, nothing for me to really worry about here, but it does explain a lot of these issues going on here. The next job to deal with this car is going to be the oil leak. I think I've narrowed it down. I used to think it was coming from the alternator bracket, but the oil for the alternator bracket, it would be on the other side of the alternator. It wouldn't be all over here and everything. So this leads me to believe that it is the valve cover gasket and possibly the timing chain gasket, which is going to be a pain in the butt to deal with, but a lot easier than the alternator gasket. So we'll get to that, but right now it's time to put this thing back together. All right, so the pump is on, the balancer is back on. Something to note, you want to be real careful when putting the 8 Torx bolts back into here. You're gonna need a Torx 45 for those bolts. They're essentially aluminum bolts with like a plastic core. They're really easy to snap. You have to be super careful. You need 22 Newton meters of force to tighten those bolts, so you really don't want to over tighten those bolts. You want to take your time with that. I took a fair amount of time to make sure I got it in nice and snug, but carefully tightening it because I didn't want to overdo it and snap the bolt, because then that's a whole nother headache that I don't want to get into right now. So taking my time is key. Now the next thing that's left to do is to reconnect all of the hoses, and I'm going to do that before I do the pulley because I can't remember if the pulley got in the way of the hoses or not. So better to be safe than sorry after getting it all together. All right, partway through this, I didn't notice that the camera had died, so started again, but I've already gotten the pump in. Luckily, I was filming with the phone when I noticed that it did die, and I'm getting back into it. Having a hard time getting the last 2 hoses attached to the coolant thermostat and the upper hose for the radiator. But once those 2 are on, we are golden to go forward with reassembly, which should probably take about 25-30 more minutes. So it shouldn't take too long, but you guys are gonna watch it at fast speed. So what I'm doing is I'm putting a little bit of coolant on the fitting, because coolant has a little bit of lubrication properties, and I'm hoping that that will help get me past what's blocking this thing from going on. And it worked.
1, 2,
yeah.
3. Please listen carefully.
You know, at the same time, I'm just gonna do that to the next one. Sometimes you just need a little lubrication, folks. It's a little bit of lubrication. We'll leave that at that. Make sure you turn and test this one. It only goes in one way, but I always want to check just to make sure I'm putting it in right. The last thing you want to find out is you put the, you mounted something and it's not fitted correctly, and then all of a sudden things go haywire, and you know, new financial problem. I gotta admit that as much as this car frustrates me, it's also sort of fun to work on. Sometimes I'm just really tired, I don't feel like doing it. but this really wasn't as bad as it could have been. Pulley back on, new pulley on. The good thing is, the hardest part of this job is pretty much over. Now the trick with tightening these bolts is you want to wedge the screwdriver. You want to get it in a position where the bolts won't turn, or say the pulley won't turn. I'm sitting here doing it with the wrong socket. You all know everything is a 10 millimeter. Everything's 10 millimeter. Nearly everything. Anyway, you want to get the bolts, or say the pulley, to not turn while you're trying to tighten these. So the easiest way to do this is to take a screwdriver and wedge it in between each of the bolts. And again, you don't want to over tighten it, because these are tiny aluminum bolts. They will shred, and then you have a bigger problem, especially at midnight when no auto store is open. All right, so the new pulley is on, and now I just need to get the belt on. And I have the diagram committed to memory, but I'm gonna go look online again just because memory is not always reliable. All right, so now we put the belt in, and like I said before, I was really lucky as far as the belt's concerned. Right as the situation happened, I had the presence of mind to shut the engine off so that I don't damage the belt. And I coasted and pulled off to the side of the highway, and everything seems to be good. So I got lucky. All right, belt's back on. Now we reassemble everything else. Of course, as you're putting the last piece on, you want to give the whole system a quick once over to make sure you didn't forget any parts. It would be bad if you forgot some parts. Luckily, this air scoop, I gotta admit, this is a really damn good design for an air scoop. I mean, it just literally sucks the air in and sends it right in. I don't really understand why people replace the factory air box with an aftermarket system for it to be sitting in the hot engine bay. This is actually a very good design because it basically takes and scoops the air in from, just under the hood or through the kidney grills up in and goes in. If anything, a nicer freer flowing air filter would be nice, but honestly, there's nothing wrong with this design. I thought about replacing it, but every time I looked at other guys' setups, it didn't make any kind of sense. I think you're just spending money just to spend money. However, mine is older and it's getting worn, so it might be time to do something about that. Not sure what that something is going to be just yet, because right now it's still very effective and very efficient. So I'm gonna give the system a quick once over. Everything is reassembled, and as you can see, it's super hard to get in there to do anything if all of this stuff is in the way. So all of it had to come out of the way. And I'm probably not gonna put the covers back on the engine for now because we're still dealing with some issues, but we are ready to put fluids back in here. I've tightened up the drain bolt on the bottom of the radiator, and yeah, we're done. I checked really quick all of my little locations, and I left no bolts up here, nothing on the side, just a little bit of garbage. And I'm gonna call this one a win for now. We'll find out when we start her. She lives. The level is good, but I'm still gonna bring some coolant with me on the road just in case I need to top it off. And yeah, I mean, like I said, everything is working the way it's supposed to. It actually sounds a lot better than it has before. So this is definitely a win. I'm happy. So again, don't be afraid to work on your cars. I have just been tired. I didn't really feel like doing this. It's been a rough semester of classes, everything that's been going on with the family, and you know, with the car breaking down a bunch of times, it's been a bit rough. We'll see if we can keep her going for a little bit longer. I have a timeline of about 6 months. If things get a lot of control, it might be time for her to go. But the wife goes first. Her Explorer, it's time. 236,000 miles is more than enough. We'll get into that in a different video. But yeah, it's a win. If you like what I've been talking about, like, share, subscribe, and join me next time on Everyday Petrolhead. Thanks.